Welcome to the Psych Central Show, where each episode presents an in-depth look at issues from the field of psychology and mental health, with host Gabe Howard and co-host Vincent M. Wales.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Psych Central Show podcast. My name is Gabe Howard, and with me, as always, is Vincent M. Wales. And today, we have a great guest all the way from the UK. We're fairly certain that this is our first guest who actually lives in... Is it England? Can we say England, or do we have to say UK? It shows you how well-traveled I am.
You can say, I'm in London. You can say England or UK.
Wonderful. I have heard of London, so I feel I feel very good. But before we move much smurth, let me start that over. But before we go much smurth,
am I experiencing Schadenfreude?
Oh man. We did that on purpose, everyone, so that I could introduce Dr. Tiffany Watt-Smith. She's a senior research fellow at the Queen Mary University of London Centre for History of Emotions, and she's the author of a couple of books, one of which is the Book of Human Emotions, and a new book that's out, Schadenfreude, The Joy of Another's Misfortune. Right out of the gate, Tiffany, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And
thank you for having me.
Thanks for mocking my mispronunciation of everything. I want everybody to know that I did that intentionally for illustrative purposes.
Great. All right, I have to ask this right up front. What exactly is the Center for the History of Emotions?
Well, we are a group of researchers in London. There's a few different research groups around the world who look at the history of emotions. But what we look at is how ideas about emotions have changed over time, how different some emotions come into fashion, like boredom in the 19th century, and others sort of drop away so that there are some emotions which used to exist that no longer do. But the main thing we're really interested in is trying to understand the origins of some of the emotions that we care most about today. So a lot of us look at the histories, for example, of happiness and the whole well-being agenda. And we look at the history of anxiety and shame and things like that. And we look at all kinds of sources, whether we're looking at literature and art or philosophy and medicine, to try and understand the way thinking about emotions has changed across time.
That is very cool. And of course, one of the things that you are looking into is the emotion where somebody gains joy when something bad happens to another person, which is referred to as, and I'm gonna butcher the word, I always do, Schadenfreude.
Yeah, you sure did.
Schadenfreude. Yeah, I mean, again, on purpose, good mispronunciation.
Yes.
So Schadenfreude, literally Schaden from harm or damage, Freude meaning joy. So damage, joy, and it means the glee or quiet, smug self-satisfaction that we might feel when witnessing someone else's accident or misfortune or minor mishap.
Yeah, we've all experienced that, and I think a lot of us immediately following that experience guilt for feeling that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this is one of the reasons why I was so drawn to this topic. I mean, not many people write about Schadenfreude, although certainly over the centuries, people have wondered about this emotion. Why do we feel it? What kind of situations do we feel it in? Is it ever morally okay to feel like this? And certainly, I think what I found was that Schadenfreude is a hugely interesting and often quite paradoxical feeling emotion. Because on the one hand, it seems to be rather possibly spiteful or malicious even, sort of enjoying seeing someone who's more successful than you, not getting that promotion, enjoying seeing that effortlessly attractive friend getting dumped, whatever that thing is. But at the same time, Schadenfreude does link into some of those things which we value most in our human societies. The thing that stands out most to me is justice. One of the reasons why we feel Schadenfreude often is because we feel that someone's getting a kind of deserved comeuppance. It's only fair that they should suffer in some way. So, someone shoves past you in the queue at the supermarket, and then their credit card is declined, or they steal your parking spots and then prang the front of their car on a bollard. These little things that kind of give us a little jolt of pleasure in our day. I think we think, well, it's karma, they deserved it. Maybe next time they won't be so, try to get one over on us and so on. So I think that Schadenfreude might seem quite antisocial, but actually often when we think about it more, we can understand that it is really connected to our, very cherished ideas about justice and fairness as well.
Well, yeah, and you brought up the word karma. Is this just karma? Is it something more? And is there an English word for this? Or is it really just Schadenfreude? I'm going to get it right before the end of the show.
There is no English word for this particular pleasure, although over the centuries people have had a go at trying to invent one. So around the 16th century, someone tried to introduce epicaricacy, but that is a real mouthful, and that definitely did not catch on, because about 100 years later you've got people saying, oh, why don't we have a word for this in English?
Yeah, and I can't pronounce that word either, so I'm glad that one didn't work.
Yeah, it was a terrible, ugly word. It comes from the ancient Greek for this particular feeling. But certainly many other cultures and languages have a word for this, but you better not ask me to pronounce it, because I definitely can't. But it's there in Danish and in French. The Japanese have a saying, a really wonderful saying, that the misfortunes of others tastes like honey. So this idea is around in many different languages, but in English, I can only assume that over the centuries, we've found the idea so distasteful and believe that it's not us that feel like this, but only other people do, that we've just never quite given it a name.
It's interesting that you said only other people feel this way, when we've all felt this way. I personally have felt this way, and I consider myself to be a good person. I know that Vin has felt this way, and I will personally vouch that Vin is a good person. But it is sort of a, like you said, people feel guilt about it. What is up with that? Is it just part of our makeup? Is there a biological need to feel this way? Why? You study emotions. Why do we have this?
So there's lots of different questions there. Just to say up front, I absolutely recognize the guilt and the discomfort around it. And even after having spent a long time writing a book about it, in which I was in the situation where I had to kind of confess my terrible Schadenfreude crimes, I still feel a certain amount of awkwardness talking about it. So maybe the question about why we might feel guilty about it, we can come back to, but there's certainly lots of reasons why we might feel this emotion, and yes, why we might be primed to feel like this. I've already mentioned about justice and how important it is actually that we enjoy seeing transgressors get some kind of comeuppance, and it's fairly obvious, I think, to assume that those pleasures have been ingrained in us from a very early stage in our social evolution, because human societies depend on justice to run smoothly. So it makes sense that we would enjoy seeing transgressors exposed or embarrassed or punished in some way. Again, I think that makes sense for forms of fairness. When we sense that someone is perhaps got a bigger slice of the cake than we have, someone is very wealthy or seems to have all the talent or all the luck, or and then we see that person sort of not quite get what they want, perhaps gets tripped up in some way. The enviably good-looking person in your school gets a huge spot on the day of the dance, something stupid like that. It gives us a little feeling of, that the playing field has been leveled again. Things feel a bit fairer. Again, very important for our societies to survive, but also important because, we find ourselves as humans living in groups constantly comparing ourselves to one another, trying to make sure that we are not falling too far behind, and making sure that we can get a good share of the resources and so on. And so in these kind of small competitive ways, which are completely normal and natural, even if they don't always feel very pleasant, then Schadenfreude does play an important part, because it's a sort of little moment of recognition that, yes, this person that we were competing with, slightly fallen behind, and that makes us feel a little boost that we might be just about getting ahead. I think that's kind of completely normal.
So it's like a boost of confidence that maybe pushes us a little further and allows the the gap to shorten a little, from the we can't overcome to wait, I see a possibility.
So the pleasure isn't simply, ha ha, you've fallen flat on your face. It's also a sense of optimism and potential for us, for our thing that we're trying to get going. One of the areas I think this is really fascinating with actually is in relation to work, in the workplace. So much Schadenfreude in the workplace, particularly I think in relation to those who are our superiors, our bosses and so on. And there's nothing sort of more delightful really than seeing that person who wields power over you, experience some minor embarrassment, because it allows us to kind of feel that, that sort of possibly not very nice boss, when they experience some sort of mishap, it allows us to kind of see a little chink, little glimpse of possibility where we might sort of steal back a tiny bit of power of our own. Psychologically, I think that's very important.
So basically what you're saying is that despite this sounding like a rather spiteful and awful emotion to suffer, we might actually get something positive out of it.
I think, of course, we do get something positive out of it because gives us pleasure, and that is hugely important. But yes, the positivity may actually sort of extend to thinking about ways in which we form more coherent and stable societies, which I think is the unexpected thing about Schadenfreude. I think Schadenfreude works in all kinds of other ways too. One of the things that's found again and again in the research on this emotion is that it really does help bond groups together. I mean, this isn't unexpected. I think we've all seen this, for example, with rival sports teams. Schadenfreude is, taking pleasure in the own goal of the other side. That's one way in which a team can really bond together. It's not just that you put the other side down, it's also that you laugh together, you feel pleasure together, and laughing together and bond is a very bonding and important experience. Now, of course, that can go too far and it can have quite unpleasant effects, so we can talk about that perhaps in a bit. But we do see Schadenfreude playing this really important role in cohering groups together. Actually, there's been some research on laughter that suggests that this may have really been a very important mechanism far back in the evolutionary past. There was a study done in the University of Oxford by Robin Dunbar, who's an evolutionary psychologist. He was looking at all kinds of laughter, but he fell on looking at sort of belly laughter, when you're laughing so hard that it actually hurts. And it's only humans that have this kind of laughter. And he found that people only ever laughed like that in response to slapstick. So people falling over, hitting themselves on the head with buckets and so on. And he found that when people laughed like that, then shortly after, they were able to withstand much greater pain than they were beforehand, or if they laughed in some other way.
So the Three Stooges were saving lives.
Well, this is what he's suggesting. He's saying that perhaps this kind of slapstick entertainment has been part of our cultural heritage for a really, really long time. And when our distant ancestors were all laughing together around a fire at someone, pretending to get hit on the toe with a hammer, that laughter was important, not just because it formed people into those groups that were crucial for survival, but also because it allowed people to cope in very hostile and dangerous environments where there was a lot of pain. I thought that was really intriguing.
We'll see you in about 30 seconds after these messages from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp.com. Secure, convenient, and affordable online counseling. All counselors are licensed, accredited professionals. Anything you share is confidential. Schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist whenever you feel it's needed. A month of online therapy often costs less than a single traditional face-to-face session. Go to BetterHelp.com/PsychCentral and experience 7 days of free therapy to see if online counseling is right for you. BetterHelp.com/PsychCentral.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Dr. Tiffany Watt-Smith discussing Schadenfreude.
I think that comedians for a long time, and even myself, I'm not a comedian, but I do public speaking. And I know that if I make fun of myself, then the audience is more likely to laugh. And there's comedians that have made their whole careers about talking about how they're, bad friends, bad, they're ugly or they're fat or they're worthless or they're pointless, or, this self-deprecating humor is just very common in our society. Is that an example of Schadenfreude? Nope, still got it wrong.
I think, there you go, doing it right now. I think that that is really one of the most neglected forms of Schadenfreude, in that when people write about Schadenfreude, they really don't often talk about this particular phenomenon. And I think this is an example of how we use Schadenfreude all the time. I mean, if you start a new job, you'll go into that office or that new group of people, and you will tell a self-deprecating story of some terrible disaster that happened to you on the way to work. You do it not just to entertain people, but so that you are seen as less of a threat. The kind of person who's coming into a new group, or is the outsider, always seems like a threatening person. So those kind of stories allow people to laugh at you and laugh with you, laugh at your expense, I suppose. And that, is a way of being accepted into the group as much as it is a way of giving everyone else pleasure. And as you say, it's an absolute staple of stand-up comedy. Stand-up comics know that people enjoy hearing about the suffering of other people, and stand-up gives them a license to enjoy it, I think.
And Schadenfreude is also an example of the millionaire with the tax problem, or the very tall person who bangs his head in the doorway, and things like that. These are all little examples of where they have something very desirable, but that desirable thing also has a negative. So maybe it's like every silver lining has a cloud, or am I oversimplifying or undersimplifying?
Look, one of the things that I found when I was trying to tackle writing this book was that, this is a very complex emotion. There are some emotions which feel like quite simple to think about because it's a trigger and a response, and it's kind of one thing, scary bear, your heart rate races and you run away. Schadenfreude isn't quite like that kind of emotion. It's what psychologists call a cognitive emotion. So a cognitive emotion means that it's involved with appraising and judging a situation, and doing all kinds of sort of very fast mental calculations to work out whether someone really deserves it, whether it's really funny, or whether in fact this person needs our help, whether they've really injured themselves, or whether they've just sort of suffered some minor embarrassment. So all of these complicated things are going on when we experience Schadenfreude, and we experience it in relation to a kind of vast range of different sorts of phenomena, and a vast range of different kind of situations. So sometimes it can be as simple as someone slipping on a banana skin, or the Three Stooges, and sometimes it's to do with, that seeing someone who we think has behaved really unfairly being called out or lambasted in the media. And sometimes it is these situations where we feel, we almost tell ourselves that, there's a highly desirable trait, being very tall, being very glamorous, being very clever, or being able to speak 12 languages, has in fact got its downsides. And this is part of the little trick we play on ourselves. And I'm sure we all do it, a way of just making life's inevitable unfairnesses that little bit more palatable. It's not just us that experience difficulty, failure, embarrassment. Everyone does. And I think that's what we want to remind ourselves of, that continually.
I don't think it should be any surprise to anyone that Schadenfreude is a complex emotion, because most emotions are. You think about all the different forms of love that we have. I mean, the Greeks had several different names for the different types. So it stands to reason that this would be in the same category, right?
My last book, The Book of Human Emotions, and I did a TED talk about this as well, makes exactly this argument, that it doesn't really make sense to distinguish between very simple emotions and complex or cognitive emotions, because actually all emotions have this very powerful cognitive element. In fact, even something as simple, or apparently simple, as fear has a hugely rich history and changes so much across different cultures, that actually fear emerges as a very complicated emotion that seems to have very different kind of physical and experiential responses when we feel it. So yeah, thanks for pulling me up on that, because actually, I want to make the point that Schadenfreude is perhaps more of an appraisal or judgment-based emotion than some others. But as you say, all emotions have this richness and complexity.
Now, Vince and I are based here in America, and I know you live in London, so this might be somewhat of a difficult question to answer, just because of, the different cultures. But we both have the internet, and when somebody falls down or gets hurt or something bad happens, that video or message will go viral pretty easily. Whereas when somebody does something well or something good, it doesn't get seen as much. And in America, we have a lot of unrest as far as political parties and race and even gender and sexuality. Are we living in the age of Schadenfreude? Are we just excited when bad things happen to people that we have dubbed our enemies? And I know that's a big question, but it seems like we're almost searching out for bad things to happen to people. And with Facebook and the internet, it's easier and easier to find.
Yeah, I mean, this phrase, "an age of Schadenfreude," was one of the reasons why I became interested in this topic, because when you're a historian of emotions, this kind of phrase, we're living in an age of blah 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 emotion, is really tantalizing. What is it about this emotion that makes people feel like it really defines the spirit of their times? And you certainly get over the centuries people saying, well, in the 18th century, we're living in an age of sympathy. In the 19th century, we're living in an age of boredom. In the early 20th century, we're living in an age of anxiety. Anyway, now we are living in an age of Schadenfreude. I think I do absolutely recognize what you're describing, which is that sort of apparently insatiable hunger for the spectacle of failure, whether that is, or particularly, I think, if that is a politician, but certainly anyone in our sort of disliked, enemy camp, as it were, and we see that person mess up in some way, there's a kind of celebration, and that celebration seems to be more public than it ever has been. I think there's two important things to think about. I mean, one is obviously that Schadenfreude has always been with us, but it is a lot more visible now than it used to be because of the internet, because of the ways in which we can demonstrate and register our pleasure in likes and shares and, thumbs up and so on. That would never have been, just wouldn't have been possible in the same way, even 30 years ago. So in a sense, that Schadenfreude is much more visible than it used to be. But there's also something about the way in which the internet works that I think possibly exacerbates our Schadenfreude. As I said, we experience a lot of Schadenfreude when we feel or perceive that someone's misfortune or mishap is deserved in some way. Now, if you spend 10 minutes, wandering around your local streets, you're probably not going to encounter many situations that outrage you and many examples of terrible injustices being carried out. But if you spend 10 minutes wandering around the internet, you are going to see lots of injustice coming at you. Whether that's looking at the news, whether that's looking at even at your local Facebook group with everyone complaining about their fly tipping or the person who doesn't pick up their dog poo or whatever it is. So there's all sorts of unfairnesses and outrage being prompted online. But also it's much easier for us to register our disapproval, to tell someone off and to enjoy the spectacle of someone being told off when we're online than it is in our face-to-face interactions. Because of course, if you see someone on the street doing something wrong, you're unlikely to march up to that person and tell them off, and you're certainly not going to stand there and point and laugh at them if someone else tells them off, because you might get punched or you might risk sort of some other kind of social embarrassment. But when we're online, it's all we're completely protected from that, and there's very little risk in calling someone out and enjoying it. So I think that the internet makes Schadenfreude much more visible, but it also I think creates an environment where we can really let our Schadenfreude rip. And that is something that I think is really important for us to be aware of. And that's why I think this emotion is very interesting for us to think about now. Because as you say, Schadenfreude becomes hugely powerful when we are divided into enemy camps and when we're in rivalries and those rival groups are set against each other. Study after study shows that Schadenfreude is very powerful when we're in groups, and very powerful when we're rivals. And so it's a very, it's a powerful combination of things, very strong divisions, for example, politically, as there are here in the UK at the moment, certainly. And then also this platform, online platforms that make it very easy to share and enjoy our glee at the other side's misfortune. So that was a very long answer to that question. I mean, there is another reason why I think that the age of Schadenfreude might have caught our attention at the moment. And it might be that I think we are feeling more Schadenfreude than before, and I think it's definitely more visible. But we're also more anxious about Schadenfreude, I think. For the last 100 years, there's really no articles published with the word Schadenfreude in the title. But since about the year 2000, there have been hundreds published. So there's a sudden influx of interest amongst psychologists and philosophers and social scientists and so on about Schadenfreude. And this real interest comes off the back of the surge of interest from the 1990s onwards in empathy. So Schadenfreude in this context is presented as the opposite of empathy or the failure of empathy or empathy's shadow. And so this is the sense why people have got quite anxious and worried about Schadenfreude. Since empathy is so desirable, what does Schadenfreude tell us about ourselves? Now, I personally think this opposition between Schadenfreude and empathy is problematic and doesn't quite work. But nonetheless, this is one of the reasons why we've got so interested in Schadenfreude today.
Well, I had a question that you already answered.
Yeah,
I was
That's
definitely.
how good you
I was
are.
gonna.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up compassion and empathy, and you've already touched on that. So great.
We really appreciate it.
And we are probably about out of time too.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I just rattled on.
No, please don't apologize. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. We learned so much. I saw a Broadway musical, Avenue Q, where they had a song that had Schadenfreude in it, and it was, funny. Obviously, they explain it for the purpose of humor, not for education. So we're very excited to have you on this to lend to it, because it's a very popular musical here in the States. So I imagine a lot of people have some little bit of information about Schadenfreude, but not as much as you just gave us. So we really appreciate it. How do we find you? What's your website, book?
I have a university website, so if you just Google my name, that will come up. I'm on Twitter. That's how you
What's your
find
Twitter
me.
handle?
It is at Dr. Tiff Watt Smith.
Beautiful, beautiful. And of course, your book, is it available on Amazon where fine books are sold?
I'm sure it's available anywhere where fine books are sold. Yes.
Excellent. And you have the two books. What are the name of the two books?
So there's the Book of Human Emotions, and this one is called Schadenfreude, The Joy of Another's Misfortune.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed having you.
Yes, we did.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to chat to you.
You're very welcome. And thank you everybody else for tuning in. And remember, you can get 1 week of free, convenient, affordable, private online counseling anytime, anywhere by visiting betterhelp.com/psychcentral. We will see everybody next week.
Thank you for listening to the Psych Central Show. Please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you found this podcast. We encourage you to share our show on social media and with friends and family. Previous episodes can be found at psychcentral.com/show. Psychcentral.com is the internet's oldest and largest independent mental health website. Psych Central is overseen by Dr. John Grohol, a mental health expert and one of the pioneering leaders in online mental health. Our host, Gabe Howard, is an award-winning writer and speaker who travels nationally. You can find more information on Gabe at gabehoward.com. Our co-host, Vincent M. Wales, is a trained suicide prevention crisis counselor and author of several award-winning speculative fiction novels. You can learn more about Vincent at vincentmwales.com. If you have feedback about the show, please email talkback@psychcentral.com.